Hello, I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I'm providing some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literary and cultural studies. Here, I'll discuss Marx's description of the commodity form and his analysis of commodity fetishism. Commodity fetishism has been a key concern of cultural studies during the 20th century, from the Frankfurt School's analyses of mass culture to the work of post-Marxists like Jean Baudrillard and many others. A commodity is any useful thing that has been rendered available for exchange with other commodities by the application of human labor. A commodity can be a material, physical thing, or it can be an abstract thing, something that is entertaining or gives pleasure. For Marx, a commodity is a distinctively social phenomenon. A commodity can only appear in the context of social exchange. Beginning from this recognition that the commodity is a distinctively social phenomenon, Marx analyzes the relationships among different types of commodities that are brought into equivalence as representations of value. A useful thing becomes a commodity only when it is made available for exchange, and it is in this relation that the labor which has rendered the thing available for exchange becomes distorted. A commodity, Marx famously observed, is a mysterious thing.
Here's the famous passage from Capital Volume 1. A commodity is a mysterious thing simply because in it the social character of men's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labor. Because the relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labor is presented to them as a social relation, existing not between themselves, but between the products of their labor. This is the reason why the products of labor become commodities, social things whose qualities are at the same time perceptible and imperceptible by the senses. In the same way, the light from an object is perceived by us not as a subjective excitation of the optic nerve, but as the objective form of something outside the eye itself. But in the act of seeing, there is, at all events, an actual passage of light from one thing to another, from the external object to the eye. There is a physical relation between physical things, but it is different with commodities. There, the existence of the thing qua commodities and the value relation between the products of labor which stamps them as commodities have absolutely no connection with their physical properties and with the material relations arising therefrom. There is a definite social relation between men that assumes, in their eyes, the fantastic form of a relation between things. In order, therefore, to find an analogy, we must have recourse to the mist-enveloped regions of the religious world. In that world, the productions of the human brain appear as independent beings endowed with life, and entering into relation both with one another and the human race. So it is in the world of commodities with the products of men's hands. This I call the fetishism, which attaches itself to the products of labor so soon as they are produced as commodities, and which is therefore inseparable from the production of commodities.
The relationships between commodities are real. If an ounce of gold is exchanged for a ton of wheat, the gold has a certain use value and the wheat has a certain use value. And the gold and the wheat also have certain exchange values. In this simple example, the use values are, in the aggregate or in the long run, not determined by social conditions, but the exchange values are determined by the amount of socially necessary labor expended upon each of these products to make it available for exchange. The labor expended in the production of commodities is social labor, not private labor. The product is not consumed by its immediate producer, but the labor in commodity production nonetheless appears to the producers as their own private labor. Every producer assumes that he or she works not to fulfill society's needs, but to fulfill his or her own private needs through exchange on the market. Thus, the complex relations that a producer has with other human beings are reduced to impersonal and seemingly uncontrollable market forces. The producers see themselves as existing in a world of commodities, constrained primarily by material conditions, not by social relations. This confusion of relations among people as relations between people and things is the fundamental contradiction of commodity production. In order to illustrate how the commodity form of production necessarily produces this misunderstanding of social relations among people as material relations between commodities and other commodities, Marx invokes two brief examples of economies that are not based on commodity production. The first passage is one of my favorite examples of Marx's wry sense of humor. Marx notes that many classical economists have tried to explain complex social economic relations by examples of humans living in primitive conditions, like Robinson Crusoe. These he calls Robinsonades. So Marx presents his own Robinsonade. Robinson Crusoe, finding himself stranded on a desert island, sets about to sustain his life in this condition of exile from civilization. Like any good Englishman, Crusoe does not neglect to keep an account book. And in his account book, Crusoe records the amount of labor effort necessary for him to produce everything that he needs. Marx relates some of these accounts to us, passing over the time that Crusoe spends in prayer, since, Marx observes, Crusoe himself describes his prayer as a pleasure and hence a recreational activity. For Crusoe on his deserted island, there is no possibility of mistaking the time and effort expended to catch a fish with the time and effort necessary to gather some firewood. This is truly private labor, and each useful thing bears transparently upon itself its value. Crusoe's primitive existence has nothing to tell us about economic production and consumption in advanced capitalism. In order to further illustrate this point, Marx then presents the situation of a peasant living under the economic system precursor to capitalism, medieval feudalism.
Marx writes, "Let us now transport ourselves from Robinson's island bathed in light to the European Middle Ages shrouded in darkness. Here, instead of the independent man, we find everyone dependent, serfs and lords, vassals and suzerains, laymen and clergy. Compulsory labor is just as properly measured by time as commodity-producing labor, but every serf knows that what he expends in the service of his lord is a definite quantity of his own personal labor power." Personal dependence here characterizes the social relations of production just as much as it does the other spheres of life organized on the basis of that production. But for the very reason that personal dependence forms the groundwork of society, there is no necessity for labor and its products to assume a fantastic form different from their reality. No matter, then, what we may think of the parts played by the different classes of people themselves in this society, the social relations between individuals in the performance of their labor appear at all events as their own mutual personal relations, and are not disguised under the shape of social relations between the products of labor.
Marx concludes this section by contrasting the mystification of labor power made possible by commodity production with a brief example of a socialist or communist mode of production in which all labor would be social labor rather than private labor. Under these conditions, Marx argues, the real relations among people would be transparent and not mystified as they are in a commodity-producing society. With that, I'll conclude this webcast. But if you have questions or comments as you're reading about and thinking about this topic, send me an email.